Chapter 2. The Warning Signs. Chase's text came 3 days later, just as Crystal was beginning to think he'd ghosted her. The thought had bothered her more than it should have. Dinner at Lucien's Friday at 8, unless you're afraid of French food. The playful challenge made her smile despite herself. Lucien's was exclusive, the kind of place you needed connections to get into. She wondered if he was showing off or if he simply had good taste. Only afraid of bad French food. See you Friday. Crystal spent the next 2 days researching Chase Carter more thoroughly than she'd ever researched a target before. His digital footprint was immaculate. LinkedIn showing steady career progression, Instagram featuring tasteful photos of travel and friends, a few mentions in finance publications for his work on sustainable investment strategies. But something was off. The pieces fit together too perfectly. Nobody was this clean, this consistent. By Friday evening, as she slipped into a black dress that hugged her curves without being obvious about it, Crystal had convinced herself that Chase Carter was hiding something significant. The perfect gentleman act was just that, an act, and she was going to expose it. Lucien's was even more impressive than its reputation suggested. All warm lighting, exposed brick, and impeccable service. Chase was waiting at the bar, nursing what looked like scotch. When he saw her, he stood, his eyes appreciative but not leering. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself," she replied, noting the tailored blazer and the subtle cologne that smelled like cedar and something unexpectedly warm. They were seated at a corner table, private without being secluded. Chase ordered wine for them with a knowledge that suggested experience rather than pretension. The conversation flowed easily, Crystal finding herself genuinely engaged in his stories about growing up as the eldest of 3 brothers. "So, your family's close?" she probed, remembering the tense phone call at the coffee shop. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, but she caught it. Practice had made her observant. "We are," he said, but there was a hesitation. "In our way." "What does that mean?" she pressed gently. Chase took a sip of his wine before answering. "It means we love each other, but we don't always understand each other. My parents have expectations, especially for me." "The firstborn curse," Crystal nodded, sensing vulnerability. "Something like that," he agreed. "One of my brothers is married with a kid on the way. The other's about to be. I'm the family disappointment at the ripe old age of 27. The bitterness in his voice was barely perceptible, but it was there. Crystal filed it away, family pressure, the need to prove himself, potential resentment toward his brothers. All useful. "And what about you?" he asked, turning the tables with ease. "Family?" Crystal had her cover story ready. Only child, parents divorced, distant but cordial relationships with both. It was the story she always used. Clean, simple, difficult to disprove. But looking at Chase across the table, his eyes genuinely interested, she found herself hesitating. "Not much to tell," she said finally. "My mom raised me alone in Connecticut. She worked a lot. We made do." Chase tilted his head slightly. "You said New Jersey the other day?" "Coffee shop." Crystal blinked. Caught. A single slip. She tried to laugh it off, but it stuck with her. He'd caught the inconsistency, stored it away, and chosen not to press her. Not because he didn't care, but because he did. Or worse, because he was watching her just as closely as she was watching him. But he smiled as if it meant nothing. "I get those mixed up too. I had a friend from Hoboken who swore it was practically part of Manhattan." She gave a quick laugh, but her pulse had quickened. He'd noticed. He remembered. And he'd let it go. Another layer of complexity. Chase seemed to sense her discomfort and smoothly shifted the conversation to lighter topics. But Crystal wasn't the only one picking up on cues. Midway through dessert, a shared creme brulee that was borderline sensual in its perfection, she caught him glancing at his phone, then quickly turning the screen face down. "Everything okay?" she asked, tone neutral but fishing. "Just family again," he said, trying to sound casual but failing. "My brother's engagement party is tomorrow. They're finalizing details." "Sounds fun," she said, watching him closely. Chase's laugh was hollow. "It would be if it wasn't also an excuse for my parents to parade me in front of every eligible woman in their social circle." "The joys of being single in your late 20s, Crystal commiserated, seeing her opening. Why not bring a date? Throw them off the scent. The moment the words left her mouth, she realized her mistake. She'd offered herself as a shield, something Alyssa Ray would never do. Chase's eyes lit up. That's actually a brilliant idea. Would you... I know it's short notice, but would you consider coming with me? It would be saving me from a night of awkward setups. Crystal's mind raced. Meeting his family was absolutely not part of the plan. It complicated everything, created witnesses, formed connections that would make a clean exit nearly impossible. I don't know, she hedged. Family events are a bit intense, he finished for her. I know, and I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. But you'd be doing me a huge favor, plus free champagne and surprisingly good catering. He was smiling at her with a mixture of hope and resignation, as if he already expected her to say no, but couldn't help asking anyway. The smart move was to decline, to maintain distance, to keep this relationship firmly in the territory she could control. What time should I be ready? The words escaped before she could stop them. Chase's genuine surprise and gratitude made something flutter in her chest. Really? I'll pick you up at 7. It's at my parents' place in Greenwich. As they waited for the check, Crystal spotted something on the screen of his phone, an email notification. The name caught her eye. Emily Carter. She quickly looked away before he noticed. His sister? A cousin? Or maybe something else? The name glowed on his screen for half a second. Emily Carter. Crystal's stomach flipped. The kind of flip that came not from jealousy, but from instinct. Something about the way he shifted his phone, the silence that followed, it didn't feel like a sister. The name lingered in her mind. No mention of a sister before, and something about the way he glanced at the screen and tilted it away told her it wasn't just any message. There was a pause too long, a silence that seemed to echo, like there was more he wanted to say, something heavy, something old, but whatever it was, Chase wasn't ready to hand it over. Not yet. As they walked out into the cool night air, Chase hailed a cab for her. Before she got in, he took her hand and brought it to his lips in a gesture that should have seemed cheesy, but somehow didn't. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, "not just for tomorrow, for tonight." Crystal felt a warning bell going off in her head. This wasn't following the script. She was losing control of the situation, of herself. "Don't thank me yet," she said, trying to regain her footing. "I might embarrass you thoroughly tomorrow." His laugh was warm as he closed the cab door. "I doubt that very much." As the cab pulled away, Crystal watched him through the back window. He stood there until she turned the corner, a silhouette under the streetlights. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the dating app. A new match. Another potential target, another man to destroy. For the first time since she'd started this game, Crystal swiped left. The cab driver caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Good date?" Crystal turned to look out the window, watching the city lights blur together as they sped through the night. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly. And that, more than anything else, terrified her. The next day, Crystal stood in front of her closet, mentally cataloging and rejecting outfit after outfit. Nothing felt right for meeting Chase's family. Too revealing, too conservative, too casual, too formal. Every choice seemed wrong in ways she couldn't quite explain. This wasn't like her. Crystal Holloway, or rather Alyssa Ray, didn't stress over appearances. She calculated them, crafted them like armor. But tonight felt different. Tonight mattered, and that made her uneasy. She finally settled on an emerald green dress that struck the right balance between elegance and subtlety. As she applied her makeup with precision, she reminded herself why she was doing this. To expose Chase Carter, to find his flaw, his lie, his secret. All men had one. And yet, as she caught her reflection in the mirror, a whisper surfaced from somewhere deeper. What if he doesn't? She brushed it aside and grabbed her phone. Her notes on Chase were still pitifully thin. No shady business dealings, no questionable photos, no inconsistencies, except one. A name. Isabel Carter. She'd seen it flash briefly on his phone, a file name notification tucked beneath a swipe. She hadn't mentioned it, hadn't asked, But the name stuck with her, and tonight she would find out who Isabel really was. At exactly 7, the buzzer rang. Crystal took a breath, slid her phone into her clutch, and opened the door. Chase stood there in a navy suit that made his green eyes stand out even more. His smile when he saw her was warm and genuine. "Home, you look incredible," he said simply. "You don't clean up so bad yourself," she replied, her voice smooth despite the tangle of nerves beneath. The car ride to Greenwich passed in a haze of introductions and briefings. His parents, Richard and Margaret, his brothers Ethan and Blake, Ethan's fiancée Vanessa. Crystal listened intently, absorbing each name like intel. She wasn't here for charm. She was here for leverage. The Carter estate was exactly what she'd expected. Old money, understated luxury, and the kind of generational wealth that didn't bother to flaunt itself. As they pulled up the circular drive, a flicker of something passed through her. Not intimidation, not excitement. Something worse, nervousness. "Ready?" Chase asked, giving her hand a squeeze. "As I'll ever be," she replied, pasting on her best effortless smile. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. Laughter, music, clinking glasses. Chase introduced her to relatives, friends, and business associates in a blur of handshakes and small talk. Crystal smiled, charmed, and cataloged. She searched for cracks, tells, shadows. "And this," Chase said at last, "is my mother." Margaret Carter was regal without trying. Her eyes assessed Crystal in a blink, not unkind, just sharp. "Alyssa," Margaret said, extending a hand, "Chase has told us precisely nothing about you, which is unusual for him." Crystal returned the handshake, noting the steel in the woman's grip. "I'll take that as a compliment. It means he's serious," Margaret replied bluntly. "Chase doesn't bring women home lightly." Crystal glanced at him, surprised. He hadn't made this sound like a big deal. "Mom," Chase began, clearly uncomfortable. "It's fine," Crystal said quickly, keeping her tone light. "We're still getting to know each other." Margaret gave a knowing smile, then paused. Just a flicker, her gaze lingering on Crystal a second too long, thoughtful, almost cautious, before moving on. Crystal exhaled. "I didn't think this was serious," she said under her breath once they stepped away. "I didn't mean to ambush you," Chase replied, apologetic. "I just wanted you to meet them." And that somehow felt worse. She was losing control of the pace. As the night unfolded, it became harder and harder to maintain her detachment. Blake's wife gushed about how Chase had driven across the state with soup during her worst pregnancy week. Vanessa swore they owed their engagement to Chase's matchmaking. Even Richard Carter, an imposing, no-nonsense man, softened when talking about his son. No scandals, no betrayals, no one with a tight smile hiding a grudge. It was maddening. She needed a break. Stepping out onto the terrace, Crystal inhaled the cool night air. She didn't notice the champagne glass until it was offered beside her. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" said Ethan, Chase's younger brother. Crystal accepted the glass with a nod. "Lovely, but yes." Ethan laughed. "That's polite. We're intense. You handled it well." She sipped, smiling. "Thanks." He studied her. "You know, Chase hasn't brought anyone to a family gathering in a long time." "I find that hard to believe," she said lightly. "Oh, he dates," Ethan said, shrugging. "But not since Isabel." The name hit her like a snap of cold wind. "Isabel?" she repeated. Ethan blinked. "He didn't mention her?" Crystal shook her head slowly. "No." "I shouldn't have brought it up," he said quickly. "Old story. Complicated. Forget I said anything." But she couldn't. Isabel Carter, the name from his phone, the one she had written off as maybe a sister or distant cousin. Now, Ethan's guilt confirmed otherwise. Wife? Ex-wife? Dead? Before she could ask, the terrace doors opened. Chase stepped out, eyes scanning until they found hers. "There you are," he said, relieved. Ethan clapped his shoulder on the way back inside. "She's a good one, bro." Chase joined her at the railing. She could feel his presence, solid and warm beside her. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked. Crystal nodded, though her thoughts swirled. "Your family is different than I expected." What did you expect? Not this, she said honestly. They stood in silence for a beat, and Crystal knew she should ask about Isabel. She turned toward him, opened her mouth. Hey, Chase said quietly, looking out into the dark. If you ever hear anything about Isabel, just know there's more to that story. I'm not ready to open it yet. Crystal froze. The air seemed to go still. Okay, she said softly. He turned to her then, his gaze piercing. I don't want that part of my life to get in the way of this, of you. She nodded again, but the alarm bells were going off in her head. Not ready to talk about it was often code for something to hide. And yet, his voice didn't sound like he was lying. It sounded like pain. I'm glad you came tonight, he said. Why did you bring me? She asked. Your mom seems to think this means something. Maybe it does, he said. Before she could respond, he leaned in, slowly, gently. She didn't stop him. The kiss started light, curious, unsure, but deepened quickly, igniting something she hadn't prepared for. When they finally pulled apart, Crystal's breath was unsteady. So was her heart. We should go back in, she whispered. Chase lingered, his eyes locked on hers. There's something real about you, he said. I feel it. She couldn't speak, could barely think, because nothing about Alyssa Ray was real. She was a story, a cover, a lie wrapped in pretty skin. And yet, she hadn't pulled away. As they walked back inside, his hand secure around hers, Crystal knew she had to act fast. She needed facts. She needed dirt. She needed to believe Chase Carter was hiding something ugly. Because the alternative, that the only lie in this relationship was her, was far too dangerous to face.